I'm very, very happy to present my views on the specific topic that's been given to me on the Deobandis and the Barelvis. Now, just for the understanding, because we have come to a stage where in the 21st century, different prime ministers or heads of the state across the spectrum have been speaking terrorism as the most important or the most threatening issue in the world order. Now, apart from all these things, when we are seeing great powers contesting, we see this particular component, that is the radicalization and subsequently leading to terrorism, as the factor that has brought people together. That's the most interesting part. We have seen where there is a difficulty among the leaders to cooperate, where they are finding it difficult to speak certain things. They've always used counterterrorism as a platform to come together. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, the topic that's given to me, one of them, especially the Deobandi, has its root in our own country, in the place called Deoband. It's very interesting, though it started off as a very, very important intervention in the very early stage as part of the freedom movement, as part of an assertiveness that was carried out from the Mughal time, because 57 is also a time when Mughals were finding very, very difficult for themselves to fight with the British, and subsequently whatever that has happened had made them to become assertive. Had they wanted an identity, there was an identity crisis, and when it was backed by a dynasty, it was very easy for them to do so. That's how it got nurtured, and subsequently they started using some of those platforms, and finally 1867 we see this being found in Deoband, with first major seminaries imparting training in Deobandi Islam. Now, as we know, the jurisprudence in Islam itself moves from one to the other. There are different ones, and some of them are very, very staunch followers of what we call as the school of Sharia, and there are also others who are comparatively better. Now, the two topics that have been given to me are very interesting, because on the one hand, you have the Barelvis, who are basically sort of groupings that have the Sufi side of it, but off late, we see that it's happening in places like Pakistan, where they're becoming very, very vocal, very strong, since at least in the last 20-25 years, more so since 2015, they've become very assertive. Now they've been challenging Imran Khan on different occasions, but otherwise they were seen to be very, very syncretic group, whereas that was not the case with the Deobandis. So they started off as early as 1867, which I mentioned, and the founders believed that the decision to establish the seminary had some sort of a divine sanction, in the sense, though it would go absolutely against what they preached in the subsequent scenarios. That means when you see them following the Wahhabi culture, in fact, that's how Al-Wahhab's idea came in, because I think in every religion there was a time or there comes a time where probably too many superstitious beliefs would come into, or they encroach, and there is a necessity to uplift, or there is a necessity to clean some of those components. So that's how Al-Wahhab came in the West Asian region, in the Najd region. In the same way, you see that spreading to different paths, and then people wanted to get back to there where Tawheed became very important intervention from Al-Wahhab's perspective. For him, Tawheed was because almost Islam, which believes in mono component, which believes in one God, had started deviating to what we see as the Sufi culture that had already come in and was also patronized by the Ottomans. And then you also see many others also trying to follow that one. I think it's human weakness. At one or the other point of time, you cling on to religion, and on top of it, when you are troubled, especially when you're going through a crisis, I think religion is the solace, because you directly cannot find any interventions that happen that you can empirically say this is something that has happened because of that, because it remains as more of an experience. And that is how even in Saudi Arabia, Wahhab came as an important intervention, where he thought that Islam had completely gone out of the lifestyle, and it was only for the namesake it had remained, from worshipping trees to tombs to individuals. Everything that had come, all shades of what we see today, had already come in there, and he felt somewhere it was prophetic for him to clean it up, though he did not assume himself to be a prophet or anything of that sort. He was very clear about it. But what he thought was bringing Tawheed, that is worshipping one God and one book, had to be brought back, due to which, because he himself hailed from a family of jurisprudence, and he wanted to do that one. So this is the same thing that comes in later stages when the religion finds itself in a difficult scenario, and 1967 became that, because prior to that one, the patronage that was coming from the Mughals was good enough to take care of it, and they themselves were doing or performing both the duties. Here there was a necessity to do so. That is how it has happened. Not going too much into history, but subsequently when we see the same organization in 100 years had already graduated more than 3,795 people in the present day India that we see today, more than 3,000 people in Pakistan, more than, let's say, closer to 500 numbers there. It has also moved to different places, including China, Malaysia, all these places. If you look at today, there are more than, closer to, not less than 9,000 Deobandi schools worldwide. That itself is a very, very strong presence that they've had. Now, what exactly is the issue between the two different schools that we are seeing which are problematic? Now, as I mentioned, Barelvis are much more syncretic. They are into the Sufi culture. And in the initial part, when India-Pakistan partition happened, in the initial stages, in fact, though the Barelvis were the biggest number, they themselves paved way for the Deobandis to come in, because Deobandi scholars went there. They were influential. As we know, Jinnah himself was a Shia. He was not a Sunni. But subsequently, these people appropriated him. They gave the burial, and they started interfering in day-to-day business, to conduct of the government, to everything they started doing. Least of the time, Barelvis realized that perhaps one day they would be replaced, and Deobandis would become the most important ones. In the sense, anything that is strictly associated with religion attracts people much more. That means going back to fundamentalism. And when fundamentalism asserts itself, that is when it gets graduated to what we call as extremism. That's exactly what has happened here. And the Barelvis, over a period of time, because of their strength in certain places, but not being assertive enough, not being able to come together as an organization, things changed much later. Now, where is this particular component? Now, it's a divided school with regard to the Deobandi, because they are opposed to whatever the Barelvis do. They are also opposed to whatever I mentioned about the three concepts of going to the trees, going to the tombs, going to individuals, thinking that they're very, very powerful. Now, all these things they're opposed to, but invariably they also fall in line, and many a times the reverence that is shown. At a point of time, actually, the Puritan level of Deobandis was so much that they would not even expect even Nabis that or prophets' birthday to be Milad, that what we call as even that has to be celebrated. They said, no, that's not acceptable, because Quran very, very clearly says that other than Allah, nobody else is worshipable. So how that would work was a very interesting component. Now, coming to whatever that has happened in the last 150, 160 years, and then subsequently where it is leading to sort of radicalization that we are talking about today, the contemporary radicalization component. I think the Deobandis have also tried to distance themselves every now and then. 2008 they have done, subsequently whenever the attacks happened, and then suddenly New York Times, someone talks about saying that, okay, this is the Deobandi form of Islam, a Deobandi component, so it has been borrowed from somewhere, and this is the place, and then they take it to Uttar Pradesh and they start showing. I think they became very, very conscious about it, and they've been trying to distance themselves, but at the same time, it is also known factor that every now and then this cleansing process starts happening, and that is what leads to most of the problem. Now, there are two concepts that are very interesting that we have to look at in the process of radicalization that attracts the youth or attracts people to get into radicalization. One is the shirk, what we call as ascribing divine attributes to entities other than the God. That is problematic for the Deobandis, whereas that's not the case with the Barelvis. And the other one is the bidah, which is illicit innovation in religious matters that we talk about. Now, Deobandis also identify a number of sources of potential shirk, which they see, including call for the Sufi saints, intercessions in ways that attribute quasi-divine parts directly to them, believing that the Prophet Muhammad's presence is there everywhere, and they start giving this or issuing these tawizes, and then they use different sources. They would say that they would chase away the Satan. Lot of other things happen, which we have seen even in India. We have some of the famous dargahs. These are all belonging to the Barelvi idea of worshipping itself. But now, when I say that this is the problem with regard to the Deobandis, invariably what problem they find is about shirk and bidah is that they see bidah as far more dangerous than the shirk because it corrupts well-meaning expression of the piety itself. Now, Deobandis did not define bidah simply as anything new, and that did not exist in the time of the Prophet. They agree that it always stayed there, but what they think is somewhere that the normativity of the revelation is very important, that we need to understand, and we also need to make sure that not anything and everything is interpreted, and not everything and anything is spoken that way, because they think there is one part where you have to honor the Prophet, and then you also have to make sure that you continue to accept all those things that has happened in his life. But at the same time, you need to be much more careful not to elevate the Prophet himself to the level of God, which is not acceptable. That is also a forbidden concept in one or the other way. Now, one of the counter critiques that we see that come from the Muslims from South Asia, we're speaking specific of a region where radicalization is a major issue, is that the Deobandis, to an extent, they've been able to be influential, but what comes back is also a lot of Muslims are uneducated. When I say uneducated with regard to the text, they still believe, or they still go to the scholars. That's why you see, though Deobandi way of looking at things is spread in different parts of the world as well as in our own region, but the influence is not of the same importance. The influence has been comparatively different. For example, let's say for a lay Muslim, they say that know the difference between salat, which is called as the ritual commandment, or what we call as the maulud, an optional or entirely natural expression of love for a prophet. Now, maulud for some of the Deobandi scholars is very problematic, because they think that's when you start doing Miladun Nabi, you start glorifying people, and you start crossing certain limits. They think it's still okay. The salat part, invariably in one or the other way, people will follow 5 times a day, several things that can happen. But unfortunately, it doesn't stay there, where Maulud is what they find it problematic, because you find a Sufi sign from Turkey, you find a Sufi sign from within India, from Kerala, you find from Ajmer, you find from somewhere else. That is when they find it problematic. So though they accept certain things, but they have problem with things like Urus, and they say this is without the input of the ulama, and they take a view against it. This is the biggest problem that we find. But where did actually the radicalization process get the impetus? If we have to look in Pakistan, we see Zia's regime, which gave rise to most of these things. So we see 1979 as some sort of a flashpoint, or the late 70s as a flashpoint. But 79 I specifically mentioned because of the Soviets, because they coming there, and then you see so many of the leaders in Afghanistan actually joining them, including Mullah Omar, who believed heavily in Wahhabism, but at the same time, he would want to see himself being there. Hakimullah Mehsud is another individual who was a commander of the Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan. And there are so many other ones which have come in one or the other way. Now, where is this danger? That means you see the Deobandi is absolutely rubbishing what the Barelvi is doing, and the Barelvis are trying to come back with what we see as certain organizations in Pakistan and other places. The Muslim community is confused, but what happens to is that anything that says itself as Puritan, the way they talk about the Sunnah, and then the Sunnis, the way they put down others, forget about the non-believers, forget about people who are non-Muslims and all those things. They first attack all those people who are within their own system. That means they say, because Wahhab also said the same thing, first we need to make sure that we clean up on the Muslims, and then we'll go outside. That means the house has to be cleaned up first, and then only we can look for others. Now the dangers here, I put them across in few points probably. The first point here is in terms of the de-radicalization process, there is no possible outcome that we see across in South Asian region, because the regimes are supporting some of these extreme ideologies, where, as I said, the Deobandi ideology that is there in Uttar Pradesh, there is no compulsion that it has to be in Karachi. There is no compulsion it has to be elsewhere, because for people, when they believe in a particular thought, it is very, very important for them that somebody has to flare it up. That means somebody who can say what you're doing is right, and I will declare an amount of money to you, and you go ahead and do this one, and this is the right way for you to approach, is one of the ways of putting across. So that is point number one. So for the de-radicalization process, there is no possibility for us to get any other group, because the Sufi groups, they themselves are in such a crisis that they want legitimacy to be given by groups like the Deobandis. That's why the Barelvis are struggling with regard to that one. So though that notion is comparatively a better one, they're ready to be syncretic, they're ready to accept other ones. They would want to say that we are Indians first and then only we are others, but unfortunately that doesn't happen. Second is, whenever you see things like an ISIS or a caliphate coming up, it invariably influences people to think that this side is perhaps the weaker one, or the Barelvi side is the weaker one. We need to go for this one because this has an apocalyptic view that across the world one day this will happen, and it has been shown in one place. And second, that fear that if you're not going to be part of it, it's like the American discourse which happened after 2001, either you are with us or with our enemies. For them, all non-Muslims are enemies, and within the Muslims, if there are some groups which are not ready to follow, they're much more dangerous than the others. That's point number two. Point number three is, time and again, when the world doesn't respond and things like Taliban taking over happen that swiftly, and then they're able to bring in Sharia, naturally you will see a patriarchal society which would want to control their women, which would want to control a lot of other things, would find it much more juicy, which it would find it much more interesting for them to unleash themselves. By human nature, we have seen how individuals want to unleash themselves. So that is point number three. Point number four is the states going absolutely soft. Many a time they're unable to do anything. You will find someone saying that, okay, I'm going to start a commando center somewhere, I'm going to take care of this one. But that's more reactionary. There is no expectation of a reaction from the state, but it has to respond. But for de-radicalization process to happen, it needs to take people together, or otherwise it has to follow what method is being followed by states like Russia, where the Chechens were put down in a way, Putin did. Though you will come under the criticism, no doubt about it. You'll be quoted with the democratic components, the constitution, a lot of other things would be said. But I think at the end of the day, everybody is on the receiving end. So probably this idea, which I've also taught several times to our students, is also the idea of the collective. Why should somebody be in collective action has to be brought into the forefront so that it doesn't go towards the radicalization process. That's point number four. Point number five is also see something, say something is a very, very strong component that has to come within the society. Otherwise, the radicalization process, it all starts off like Iran. It probably starts off with the simplest way, and then subsequently the way it will take over is very, very dangerous. This is something that we have seen in Maldives. We have seen it in Bangladesh. We have also seen it happening in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka bore the brunt of it because it could not react in the first place. It forget response. It could not even react to whatever that was given. Even a reaction could have saved face for it, but it did not do. So I just gave 5 important points on the radicalization component, how Deobandi and the Barelvi components have been moving in, where Barelvi still continue to think that there are these emancipatory processes that are available with them, and then when nothing works, they probably have to get into that radicalization, extreme radicalization. Otherwise, the Barelvis are still bearable, they're still manageable group. Whereas the Deobandis, you have in different places different type of groups, some taking the extreme position and supporting the ISIS, some taking extreme positions and supporting what's happening in Taliban or in Afghanistan, and there are other groups which would want to say, no, we have an identity that's much before the Deobandi, we are from here, or anything of that sort. So it's a confused lot, there is no doubt about it, but radicalization is a reality. There is no doubt about that one. Radicalization is a reality, and the 5 points I said is a reality that we have to probably reckon with. I think I'll stop it here. The time that was given to me was 20 minutes. I need to just abide by what's been given to me by the chair. Thank you, Major General, and also thank you, Indic Research Forum. And thanks to all the participants for the patient listening. Thank you.